The small team of soldiers, led by Captain Emily Hayes, carefully advanced through the narrow, winding corridors of the underground facility. The walls were covered in layers of dust, remnants of an era long forgotten. The air was thick with a musty odor, and the flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Their mission was simple: find any useful intel that might help shift the tide of the war. What they stumbled upon, however, was something far beyond anything they could have imagined. "Move carefully," Emily whispered, signaling her team to halt. They had reached a large, reinforced door, the kind meant to keep intruders out. The door was sealed shut, and there was no sign of recent activity. It appeared abandoned, and yet a strange energy seemed to pulse through the room beyond it. The team's military sensors didn't pick up anything out of the ordinary, but the nagging feeling in the pit of Emily's stomach told her something wasn't right. "Should we force it open?" asked Sergeant Theo, his voice low but filled with curiosity. He was the team's tech specialist, usually the one to hack into systems or bypass security. But even his calm demeanor faltered as he studied the door. "Let's see if we can find another way," Emily replied, her instincts sharper than ever. She motioned to the rest of the team to check for alternate entries. After a few minutes of searching, they discovered a hidden panel embedded in the wall. A few seconds of searching through the control panel, and Theo's fingers danced over the screen, bypassing the complex lock codes. The door groaned open with an unsettling hiss, revealing a large, cold chamber. It looked like a high-tech medical lab, sterile, devoid of any human presence. But at the center of the room lay a massive cryogenic pod, encased in transparent glass. Within it, the figure of a man, perfectly preserved in stasis, could be seen lying on a metallic table. His features were sharp, his body muscular and finely sculpted, like that of a warrior carved from marble. But what caught Emily's attention most were the tubes and wires running from his body to the walls, a network of intricate systems keeping him alive, or at least suspended in some state of suspended animation. "What is this?" whispered Private Rodriguez, the youngest member of the team, awe and fear in his voice. Emily's heart pounded as she cautiously approached the pod, her mind racing to comprehend the situation. "This isn't just some lab experiment," she muttered, her eyes scanning the room. "This is military. And it's human." As Theo worked to access the pod's control panel, Emily's mind raced. This was far beyond any research humanity had conducted before. Was this a weapon? A soldier? She had heard rumors of classified military projects, but nothing on this scale. The pod hissed again as it began to power up. Slowly, the cryogenic chamber began to open, releasing a cloud of cold mist. The man inside stirred, his eyes flickering open for the first time in decades. His gaze met Emily's, sharp, intense, and unblinking. He blinked, his voice hoarse but clear. "What year is it?" Emily stood frozen for a moment before answering. "It's the year 2167. The man's eyes narrowed, processing the information. His breathing quickened, and then, as though an instinct had kicked in, he surged upright, seemingly unfazed by the cryogenic freeze he had just endured. He was a weapon, and it was clear that whatever they had done to him had worked far beyond any human expectations. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, keeping her weapon ready but lowered. "I'm Jonas Kor," the man said, his voice steady, almost mechanical. "And I was created to end this war." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The team stood in shock, staring at the man who had just awakened from decades of cryogenic sleep. Jonas Kor, the superweapon, had been dormant for far longer than anyone had expected. Emily's mind raced as she tried to process the gravity of the situation. This man, this soldier, was a key to humanity's survival, or perhaps its destruction. Jonas stood fully upright now, his movements fluid and controlled, a stark contrast to the disorientation that had gripped him moments before. His eyes scanned the room, quickly taking in the faces of the soldiers around him, calculating each of them in the span of a few seconds. His gaze settled on Emily, and for a moment, she felt as if she were being sized up by something far beyond human. "Where am I?" Jonas asked, his voice deep and steady. His words lacked the shakiness of someone who had just woken from a deep sleep. He was composed, almost unnervingly so. "You're in a military facility," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands gripped her rifle tighter. "We're human soldiers, part of the resistance against the alien invasion." Jonas's expression remained neutral, but his eyes flickered with something. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just calculation. "The war," he murmured, almost to himself. "How much time has passed?" "More than 20 years, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The aliens have been pushing us back, taking territory, slaughtering millions." Jonas's jaw tightened at her words, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw something deeper in his eyes, a flash of fury. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the stoic, detached expression he wore when speaking. "Then we've lost," he said flatly. Emily's heart sank at the resignation in his voice. For a moment, she thought that Jonas had already given up on humanity. But then she saw the faintest spark of something else, something powerful beneath the surface. "Not yet," she said firmly. "We found you for a reason. You were designed to help us win this war." Jonas didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced at the pod from which he had emerged, as if silently assessing it. The rest of the team exchanged uneasy looks. They weren't sure what kind of soldier Jonas had been, what his training had been like, or what he was capable of. All they knew was that this was their only chance to turn the war around. "Why me?" Jonas finally asked, his voice softer, almost inquisitive. "Why bring me back now?" Emily took a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that humanity needed him. "Because you're the key to saving Earth," she said. "We need you to fight, to lead us." Jonas's gaze hardened. "Then let's begin." With those words, the decision was made. The team had already made up their minds. They had no other choice. There was no time for questions, no time for hesitation. Jonas was their weapon, their last hope. They would have to trust him, even if they couldn't fully understand what he was or what he could become. As Jonas followed them out of the facility, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker than the war itself had just been unleashed. And yet, despite the fear that gnawed at her, there was one thing she knew for sure. Jonas Kor was no ordinary soldier. Whatever he was, whatever he had become, humanity was about to experience a change that would shift the balance of the war forever. The first battle was not supposed to be a turning point, but when Jonas Kor stepped onto the battlefield, it became impossible to ignore the sheer force of his presence. The alien forces, who had been crushing human resistance for years, underestimated the power of this single human soldier. The mission was simple: to reclaim a strategic outpost on the outskirts of New York, one of the last human strongholds. The alien invaders had already established a fortress there, fortified with heavy artillery and alien drones. It was a suicide mission for any normal soldier, but for Jonas, it was a challenge he accepted without hesitation. As the human forces moved in, Jonas led the charge. His enhanced senses allowed him to anticipate the alien movements before they even occurred. He moved with inhuman speed, dodging laser fire and closing in on alien soldiers with deadly precision. His fists struck like sledgehammers, tearing through alien armor and sending foes flying. The human soldiers behind him couldn't believe their eyes. Jonas wasn't just fighting. He was dominating. He moved with a grace and power that defied everything they had ever known about warfare. He was a blur of motion, too fast, too strong for the aliens to catch up with. The alien drones, once the terror of the human army, stood no chance against him. Jonas tore through them with ease, using advanced combat techniques that seemed almost impossible for a human. "This is unbelievable," Private Rodriguez muttered, watching as Jonas tore through the alien defenses like a storm. His voice trembled with awe and fear, but his hand remained steady on his weapon. The young soldier couldn't help but feel both terrified and inspired by the power Jonas displayed. By the time the last of the alien drones fell, the human forces had taken control of the outpost. The air was thick with the smell of burning wreckage, and the bodies of both human and alien soldiers littered the ground. Jonas stood among the wreckage, breathing heavily but otherwise unaffected, his eyes scanning the horizon. Emily approached him cautiously, her mind still reeling from what she had just witnessed. She had seen soldiers die, witnessed the horrors of war. But what Jonas had done, it was beyond anything she could have imagined. "Jonas," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "you saved us. This could change everything." Jonas didn't respond immediately. He was looking out over the battlefield, his expression unreadable. It was clear he was processing the events in a way the others couldn't understand. "You think this changes anything?" he asked quietly, his tone colder than she expected. "The aliens will adapt. They'll regroup, and will still be outmatched. One victory doesn't change the course of this war." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? The alien forces had always been one step ahead, always adapting to every human strategy. But Jonas had just taken on an entire fortress and won. If humanity could harness his abilities, perhaps they had a real chance. "We'll have to be ready," she said, her voice firm. "This is just the beginning." Jonas nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure we're ready for the next fight." The human soldiers were still celebrating their unexpected victory when an incoming transmission interrupted their moment of triumph. The message was brief but clear. The aliens were preparing a counteroffensive, and it was going to be bigger, faster, and more deadly than anything they had faced before. Jonas's eyes narrowed. The battle for New York had been just a taste of what was to come. The war was far from over, and the real test was yet to come. Jonas stood in the war room, the map of Earth's remaining human territories projected in front of him, as military leaders gathered around him. His mind, though a battlefield of its own, remained eerily calm. The successes of the past few weeks had been undeniable. Humanity's forces had begun pushing back the aliens, recapturing territories once thought lost forever. But Jonas knew better than anyone that this fragile momentum was only a fleeting hope. His enhanced abilities had turned the tide in battle, but they had also burdened him in ways his creators never could have predicted. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a symbol, a living weapon, a force that had the potential to either save humanity or destroy it. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him every waking moment. Emily Hayes, standing at his side, noticed the distant look in his eyes. She had come to depend on him more than she cared to admit, but the strain on Jonas was beginning to show. He had always been precise, efficient, even detached, but now there were moments when his focus seemed to falter, moments when his humanity blowed through, fleeting expressions of doubt, uncertainty, and most troubling of all, fear. "What's bothering you?" Emily asked, her voice soft, though it carried an edge of concern. Jonas turned to face her, his gaze hardening. "I was made to fight. But what happens after the fight? After the war is over?" His voice was low, but his words rang out in the quiet room. The question hung in the air like a heavy fog. Emily didn't know how to answer. She had seen Jonas in action, and she had seen how his presence had inspired the troops, giving them hope when all seemed lost. But what happened when the war ended? Would he simply fade into obscurity? Or worse, would he become something no one could control? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice laced with uncertainty. "But I do know this. Humanity needs you. You're the one who's shown us that we can fight back, that we can win." Jonas's eyes darkened. "What if I'm not just a soldier anymore? What if I'm a weapon, a tool that's been made to fight and destroy? What happens when there's no one left to fight?" Emily took a deep breath, her gaze softening. She had seen the toll this war had taken on him. He was more than just a soldier to her now. He was someone she could relate to, someone struggling with the same uncertainty they all faced. But she couldn't afford to let him fall into despair. "You're not just a weapon, Jonas. You're human, and humanity is more than just what we fight for. It's about what we do after the fight, how we rebuild, how we live. Don't lose sight of that." Jonas's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't know if I can be that person. Not after everything I've been through, everything I've been made to do." Before Emily could respond, the room was filled with the sharp beep of a transmission alert. The display flickered, and an image of a high-ranking alien officer appeared on the screen, their face cold and calculating. "You think you have the upper hand, humans, but you have no idea what's coming. This war is far from over." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving behind an ominous silence. Jonas's jaw clenched, his thoughts momentarily disrupted. The aliens weren't finished with them. The war was far from over. The weight of that knowledge was heavy. And yet, despite his internal battle, Jonas knew what he had to do. The war would not wait for him to figure out who he was. The fight had only just begun. Jonas stood on the balcony of the command center, staring out at the war-torn landscape below. The city of Paris, once a symbol of human civilization, now lay in ruins. Alien ships hovered overhead, a constant reminder that they had pushed humanity to the brink. The war was reaching its boiling point, and every day more lives were lost. Yet in the chaos, Jonas had become the human army's strongest weapon. The one thing standing between Earth's complete annihilation and a future worth fighting for. But even his unparalleled strength had its limits. He could tear through alien forces with ease, dismantling their ranks like a storm. But the toll it took on him, both physically and emotionally, was beginning to show. He no longer saw the battlefield as a place of victory. It was a constant reminder of what he had become, a living weapon, bred for one purpose: destruction. "Jonas, we need you." Emily's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him away from the view. She stood in the doorway, her expression one of concern and determination. "The aliens have mobilized again. This is the largest assault we've seen yet. They're coming for our last stronghold." Jonas turned slowly to face her, his eyes tired, his expression unreadable. He had seen this before: the frantic pace of war, the constant need for more, the ever-present desire for a victory that always seemed just out of reach. "I've fought long enough, Emily," Jonas said, his voice colder than usual. "I've done everything I can, but the more I fight, the more I lose myself. We're just one battle away from losing everything. And I don't know if I can do this anymore." Emily stepped closer, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You're more than just the weapon they created, Jonas. We need you, yes, but we also need you to stay true to who you are, to the person you've become through all of this. You can't keep shutting yourself off from the rest of us." Jonas looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes. There was something in her gaze, a quiet plea that spoke louder than words. She wasn't just asking him to fight. She was asking him to believe in humanity again, to believe in the cause he had been created to fight for. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. The war wasn't just about winning battles. It was about survival, about hope, about what they would rebuild after all of this was over. The weight of the world rested on his shoulders, and no matter how much he wished it could be different, he knew he had no choice but to keep fighting. "I'll fight," Jonas said, his voice steady, though tinged with uncertainty. "But we need to make this count. If we fail now, we lose everything. And I won't let that happen." Emily nodded, a mix of gratitude and worry in her eyes. She knew Jonas was carrying more than any soldier should, but she also knew he was their best chance. She wasn't about to let him fall apart. Not now, not when humanity's survival depended on them. With that, they turned to the command center's map, where alien ships began to appear in full force. It was time for the final push, and Jonas would lead them. Whether or not he was ready, whether or not he had found peace with his place in the war, the choice had already been made. The fight for Earth was reaching its peak, And Jonas Core, the weapon that had sparked hope, was about to face the greatest battle of his existence. The alien armada loomed over Earth's last stronghold, a colossal force of destruction, poised to wipe out humanity's final defenses. The countdown had begun. In less than 24 hours, the aliens would strike, and they would not stop until the human resistance was completely eradicated. The weight of the upcoming battle pressed on everyone's mind, but none more than Jonas Core's. Jonas stood at the front lines, his gaze fixed on the massive alien fleet in the sky. The black ships, like shadows against the darkened sky, were silent and menacing. They hovered above the cities, already signaling their intent to annihilate everything in their path. The battlefield had become a symbol of all that was at stake, a world on the edge of ruin. The human forces had rallied behind Jonas. The soldiers, the generals, and even the civilians who had been enlisted in the fight, all had placed their hopes and faith in him. And yet, Jonas couldn't escape the heavy burden of being humanity's last hope. The weight of their expectations felt unbearable. Emily was by his side, her face etched with exhaustion and determination. The final plan had been drawn, and the strategy was set. The aliens had one glaring weakness, one vulnerability that Jonas would have to exploit if humanity had any chance of survival. Their central command ship. Destroy that, and the entire alien force would collapse. Jonas, Emily said softly, placing a hand on his arm. You're not in this alone. We're with you. Jonas turned to her, his expression still unreadable. I've fought for so long, Emily, but I've never been able to escape the feeling that I'm just a tool. A weapon. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Emily shook her head, her voice unwavering. You're not a weapon, Jonas. You're a man. You've shown us that time and time again. You've inspired us to keep going when it felt like all hope was lost. Now, it's time to finish what we started. Jonas's eyes softened. Her words, simple as they were, reached into the depths of his soul. For the first time in a long while, he began to understand something that had eluded him for so long. It wasn't just the war he was fighting. It was the people he was fighting for. The future of humanity rested on his shoulders. But it wasn't just about defeating the aliens. It was about proving to himself that he wasn't just a tool. He was something more. The mission was clear. Jonas would lead the charge, infiltrating the heart of the alien armada to destroy their command ship. The human forces would provide cover, launching a coordinated assault to keep the aliens distracted long enough for Jonas to strike the fatal blow. As the hours ticked down, Jonas gathered his thoughts. The final assault would not be easy. It would be the hardest battle he had ever faced. The alien defenses were fierce, and the risks were higher than ever before. But the stakes had never been more clear. He was no longer the weapon created to destroy. He was humanity's hope, and that was enough to give him the strength to fight one final battle. I'm ready, Jonas said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Emily nodded, her eyes full of trust. Then let's end this, Jonas. Together. And with that, the final assault began. The battle for Earth's future had come down to this moment. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. The ground trembled as the final assault began. Earth's last stand was not a battle of armies. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing fight against an enemy that had devastated humanity for decades. The alien fleet, a vast array of ships descending on the final human stronghold, hovered menacingly above. Jonas Core, the last hope of humankind, led the charge with the full weight of the world on his shoulders. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face was an unreadable mask. Behind him, the human forces surged forward, pushing through the streets as they launched their final offensive. The coordinated assault aimed to distract the aliens long enough for Jonas to reach their central command ship, the heart of their entire operation. It was a nearly impossible task, but Jonas was no stranger to impossible odds. Emily was by his side, her determination unshaken. You've got this, she said, her voice full of conviction. We'll hold them off. You do your part. Jonas nodded, but the pressure was overwhelming. The alien defenses were fierce, and even with the humans' best efforts, it was clear the battle was going to be brutal. Alien drones and ships engaged the human forces in a barrage of laser fire and explosions, the sky lighting up with the devastation of war. Jonas pushed forward, moving with inhuman speed and agility, cutting through alien forces as if they were paper. His enhanced strength allowed him to tear through enemy lines, clearing the way for the human soldiers behind him. Yet, with every alien destroyed, the weight of the battle only grew heavier. There was no turning back now. As Jonas made his way closer to the alien command ship, he saw the scale of their power. The ship loomed like a massive fortress in the sky, a dark monolith surrounded by a swarm of enemy fighters. It was a fortress in every sense of the word, bristling with defenses that seemed impenetrable. But Jonas was unrelenting. The mission was clear: destroy the command ship, and the alien fleet would crumble. Emily's voice came over the comms, sharp and urgent. "Jonas, we're almost there. But you need to move faster. The alien reinforcements are on their way, and we won't be able to hold them for much longer." Jonas pushed forward, his body a blur of motion as he cut through alien drones, his mind focused solely on the task ahead. As he reached the base of the command ship, a loud, deafening roar echoed through the battlefield. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. A massive alien warship descended, flanked by a legion of deadly fighters. It was their final line of defense, and they were determined to stop him at all costs. Jonas stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the challenge. This was the moment where everything would either fall into place or crumble to dust. He sprinted toward the warship, weaving through gunfire, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge incoming blasts. In a flash, he was at the ship's base, his hands tearing into its metal hull with the precision of a master. His mind was sharp, his body an extension of his will. There was no room for hesitation. The countdown had begun. The fate of humanity rested in the outcome of this moment. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and the heavy hum of alien weaponry as Jonas stood at the base of the massive alien command ship. His chest heaved with exertion, his enhanced body fighting against the strain of his relentless pace. The warship loomed above him, a towering fortress of alien technology that seemed insurmountable. But Jonas knew that this was the moment he either destroyed the heart of the alien forces or let humanity fall to extinction. Behind him, the battlefield raged on. The human forces fought tooth and nail to hold the alien army back, but Jonas had one task, and one task only: to destroy the command ship and cripple the alien invasion once and for all. He glanced up at the warship. It was surrounded by an impenetrable shield, a shimmering energy barrier that prevented any attacks from reaching its core. There was no way through, not from the ground anyway. "Emily, I'm at the ship's base," Jonas said, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding him. "I can't break through the shield. I need you to guide me. Tell me where to go." There was a brief silence on the other end of the comms before Emily's voice crackled through, strained but determined. "We've intercepted alien schematics. There's a weak spot, Jonas, a venting shaft near the center of the command ship's lower hull. If you can get inside, we can trigger a chain reaction that'll destroy the entire ship." Jonas's eyes narrowed. The plan was risky. No, more than risky. It was nearly suicidal. But there was no time for hesitation. "Understood. I'll make my way to the shaft." With a swift motion, Jonas bounded toward the side of the command ship. Alien gunfire erupted around him, but he moved too fast, too precisely. His body was a blur of motion as he tore through the defensive barriers, using his strength to rip through the ship's external armor. Each blow sent alien drones scattering in every direction. When he reached the venting shaft, Jonas found it nestled between layers of reinforced armor. He immediately began to pry it open, the sound of metal groaning under his strength echoing through the battlefield. But as he wrenched it free, a sudden wave of alien fighters descended upon him. Their weapons blasted the air with a deafening roar, and the ground shook with the force of their assault. Jonas's eyes burned with determination. He dove into the shaft, pulling the hatch closed behind him just as the alien fighters unleashed a barrage that shook the entire structure. He had no time to think, no time to question whether he'd survive. The path to the core was clear, and with one final push, he had to give it everything he had. Inside the command ship, the alien heart pulsed with dark energy. Jonas sprinted through the ship's labyrinthine halls, each step leading him closer to his goal. His heart raced, not with fear, but with a single driving thought: humanity would survive. He would make sure of it. At the center of the ship's core, Jonas planted the explosive charges. The countdown began, but something was wrong. A voice, distorted and cold, echoed through his mind. The alien commander. "You think you've won, human. You've only delayed the inevitable." Jonas's response was simple: "Not today." As the countdown hit 0, a blinding explosion rocked the ship. The core detonated in a burst of light and fire, and the alien fleet began to disintegrate. The warship crumbled, its shield shattered, and its power source collapsing in on itself. Jonas felt the explosion ripple through him, the shockwave tearing through the ship. As the command ship imploded, Jonas was caught in the blast, the last remnants of the alien threat vanishing in an instant. But as the dust settled and the remains of the alien armada fell from the sky, there was no sign of Jonas' core.